I want to ask you to try to remember how you felt earlier this week when you first heard the news that George Zimmerman had been shot in the face. It was a road rage incident in Florida, and as it turns out, the inexplicably free killer of Trayvon Martin was not actually shot in the face. He did get into this shouting match, and he was waving his gun, and the guy he was waving his gun at was also armed, and he drew his gun and shot at George Zimmerman and broke the window, and so a piece of glass scratched his face. But still, what I'm asking you to remember is what Germans call Schadenfreude, a moment of pleasure that you experience when you find out that someone you don't like is in pain. It's not that you would have shot George Zimmerman if you had the chance. You probably wouldn't punch him in the face if he was in line behind you at Target. You wouldn't key his car. You probably wouldn't even give him a wedgie. But when you hear that he's been injured, you might just find yourself smiling to yourself. I did. I'm not proud of the fact, but I did. Taking pleasure in the pain of others at least opens the door to this awareness that Schopenhauer is writing about. Are we the most perfectly evil creatures in the world? Schopenhauer died before there was a Nature Channel, so I think we can be a little bit forgiving of his assumptions. I don't think that human beings are the only animals on earth that inflict pleasure on one another, but we can probably make a pretty persuasive argument that that's generally true. It comes close enough to being the truth to be still worth saying. That we sometimes hurt other people for the pleasure we derive from them being hurt. Now, human psychology is a very complex thing. Some parts of our more violent and apparently evil traits can be traced to animal instincts. Human beings are more like canines than other animals, that we tend to be very similar to the social network of a dog pack. So we, like dogs, might bark at or bite a stranger while we're defending our territory, or we might fight with each other in non-lethal battles in order to establish a pecking order. But within the evolution of language and civilization, and especially with the evolution of communication technology, many of our more complicated neuroses show themselves when we will be willing to metaphorically bite someone just because we can do it at a distance and get away with it. There may be aspects of our gathering service that are still little more than echoes and shadows of our more traditional Christian past, but the presence of a prayer of confession in our services is, at least on my part, an intentional, preserved landmark. We no longer confess our sins bowed before a heavenly judge from whom we are begging for mercy. We don't do the Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Our prayers of confession tend to be more meditative reflections on who we are and what our civilization is like. We've been trying to pull the heart and mind of what it means to be people of faith out of superstition and myth that have polluted and obscured faith, but the notion of sin, in my opinion, is not anachronistic. There is a substantive difference between choosing to lead a spiritual path in life and just following our animal instincts. Our complex human psyche, left to its own devices, will lead us to take pleasure in the suffering of people we don't like, and will, at times, cause us to inflict suffering on someone else just for our own satisfaction. It is a base, an undesirable, and evil instinct. The good news, as Henry David Thoreau put so eloquently, I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of a person to elevate his life by conscious endeavor. To choose a spiritual path is to reject the notion that we really are just naked apes, that we are just acting out of our instinctive reactions to our environment. We can, by conscious choice, change who we are and how we live. One of the greatest minds of American history, William James, who was a physician and a psychiatrist and a philosopher, looked back on his long published and storied career and said, "I now perceive one immense omission in my school of psychology. The deepest principle of human nature is the craving to be appreciated." It's something that is just true of even the most shy individual. We have an urgent need to be given attention and to be shown appreciation. And oftentimes, if people don't feel like they're getting enough of it, they will go about getting it in the worst ways. Years ago, I was trained in parent effectiveness training, and we were told there were 4 basic motivations for a child's misbehavior. One was attention, one was power, display of inadequacy. But the thing that I found the most interesting as I dealt with those motivations for misbehavior was that it also applied to church board meetings, that the very same things that motivated people to act badly in a nursery is what made church board members act so badly at times. That the need for attention, the need for power or revenge, or even to display inadequacy, continues into our adult lives. And I think all 4 of those motivations, whenever someone says, well, why did so-and-so do this, or why did they say that, probably the first thing you could go to is to think of those 4 motivations and wonder, are they attention-seeking? Are they trying to get revenge for something? Are they trying to gain power over something, or are they simply trying to display inadequacy? Siblings fight with one another for their parents' attention and approval. Office politics is often fueled not just in a competition for raises and promotions, but for attention. My former church, I got a significant raise every year. I was one of the best paid clergymen in the United States, but every year when I would meet with the personnel committee and they would tell me what they intended to do for me financially, I would say, why don't you not give me a raise this year and just treat me better? And they always gave me a raise because they could do that. I mean, you can do things with money that you don't appear to be able to do within a genuinely sick institution. But voluntary associations, whether they're civic organizations, social fraternities, your Facebook friends, churches, and I would say especially even liberal churches are probably more likely to succumb to this, because we can become the battlefield of no-cost ego battles where the search for attention and approval can be carried out with no personal loss. There are things that you can do in voluntary associations that you can't do where you work because you get fired. But in voluntary associations, you have a low-cost way of acting badly. Because we are independent thinkers, because we have rejected all pre-digested creeds and we don't identify ourselves as being disciples of Martin Luther or John Calvin or Alexander Campbell, we think for ourselves. And that's a good thing. But thinking for yourself can also lead to selfish detachment. Rugged individualism that we say is so much at the heart of what it meant to make America America, rugged individualism can very quickly become ferocious individualism. Rejecting the mind control of belonging to a group, whether that's a particular creedal church or a labor union or a political party, we can lose our ability to empathize, even to remember that other people also have feelings, that they have family members, that they have children. And I'll readily confess, now that I've been out of the newspaper business for a full year, I realize now that a lot of my self-identity was with that column. For 25 years, I wrote an opinion column, and I identified myself with that. And yet, the most visceral part of losing that column for me has been I no longer go online every day to see what comments are being made about the column, because having my character dragged through the mud by internet trolls day after day, I realized was a poison that was just affecting the way that I viewed the world and my own life. even though the people who commented knew that I was a local author, that I wasn't some syndicated columnist that lived in a far distant city that would never see the comments, many weeks it seemed almost like there was a contest to see who could say the meanest, most hurtful things that could be said. And now, as we're gearing up for another presidential campaign, the shorthand of slander will become more and more frequently used to narrow the field of candidates. Social media is especially good at using a single image with a short caption to make someone appear to be evil or stupid or a hypocrite. Schadenfreude is all over Facebook whenever somebody makes a mistake. Here in Missouri, we hardly pay attention to the politics in Louisiana, but when Louisiana state candidate Bill Cassidy announced that his teenage daughter was pregnant, he didn't get any sympathy because Cassidy has been a loud opponent of sex education in Louisiana schools. He's insisted on abstinence-only education. So when his own 17-year-old daughter becomes pregnant when she's unwed, then Facebook fills up with this stuff that's just trying to tear Cassidy down without being aware there's a 17-year-old girl and a baby on the other side of that viciousness. That they are the ones that are going to take the real brunt of how much those of us, I'm obviously a big advocate for sex education. I'm a big advocate for Planned Parenthood. I despise politicians that try to throw this puritanical stuff onto the public and legislate what your kids get to learn about reproductive safety and prevention of unwanted pregnancies. But you have to recognize there's a human being on the other side of that conversation. Possibly a misled human being, possibly a not very bright human being, possibly a truly hypocritical human being. But that doesn't mean that we should engage in Schadenfreude as if it was some kind of sacrament that we can then enjoy every time someone screws up and makes a fool out of themselves. Gossip and slander are a kind of shorthand for our rapid-fire internet communication. We rarely want to read the whole article. This is, again, what I find in so many of the comments on my posted sermons. I put up a paragraph to describe what every sermon is about, and then on many of the pages where those posts go, people are arguing with the two-sentence description. They haven't listened to the sermon. They're responding to the description as if that was the whole of it. I've been guilty of it. I think I'm against the TTP trade agreement, but I'm against it because my girlfriend, Elizabeth Warren, is against it, and Bernie Sanders is against it. I haven't read that much about the TTP, but this is what our level of communication does to us. We tend to communicate through gossip. We communicate through an image and a sentence, just a few words, and that then becomes the basis of our research. And we're willing to throw human beings onto a trash heap as a result of nothing more than a smear campaign. But the more we do this, the more it deadens us to the empathy necessary to still see other humans as human. Public figures set themselves up to be treated as if they were institutions rather than people. But as we saw all too clearly in February, when our Missouri State Auditor, Tom Schweich, a Republican candidate for governor, committed suicide after being the victim of a whisper campaign. Now, I've had a lot of people say a lot of mean things about me. People were saying that he was Jewish, and he's an Episcopalian. He had one grandparent that was Jewish, but he simply couldn't take people being publicly that dishonest about him. And of course, there's still a lot of anti-Semitism in this area. I don't know how you can be prejudiced against a nearly invisible minority. I mean, if you live in Missouri, you don't run into enough Jewish people to ever even find a good bagel anymore. It's just not. There's not that many here, but there's still so much anti-Semitism in Missouri. But even a month after Schweich had committed suicide, his office's spokesperson, Robert Jackson, also committed suicide. That the negative energy, the painful slander and gossip about people, even as public figures, oftentimes actually has a casualty count. We act like we live in an impersonal universe, but we do not. There are human beings on the other side of our aggressive language, and some of those human beings are just not able to take the public humiliation and ridicule. Politics is a rough and tumble world, and I'm not expecting us to engage in political discourses in the coming year as if we had suddenly become a Quaker meeting hall. There are hard realities to be discussed and candidates to be vetted, but I am asking you to be honest. And I'm asking you to remember that there are always human beings involved, and almost all of those human beings have families. And honestly, I'm concerned about how we develop a taste for blood. The habits we hone and how we talk about candidates who will never know who we are or what we said come home to be the same kind of language we use to describe our own family members and friends. It becomes the way that we talk on Facebook, the way we comment on news stories. Am I the only one who has noticed that I have fewer actual friends to invite over for a backyard barbecue than I had before I had 3,000 friends on Facebook? Nearly 3,000 years ago, Homer wrote that men love in haste but detest one another at leisure. The speed of love and friendship has been dramatically accelerated in our social networking age, but our ability to detest one another has reached an art form. Now, building a community is difficult because human nature is complex and we're never entirely aware of our own motivations. We dismiss relationships now as if there were an endless supply of sincere friendships and family members available to us, and then we wonder why we lead increasingly isolated lives. If in fact leading a spiritual life is different from just following our primal instincts, then we have to practice the virtues of living a spiritual life. We have to forgive, even when it's not deserved. We need to have empathy for people, even when they have done something that is terribly wrong, like disagree with us on religious or political views. We have to pull the stakes of our tents outward rather than inward, so that we can include even some people who are not universally enjoyable. You've heard me say it before, but you learn to ride a bike by riding a bike. You don't learn to ride a bike by reading about bicycles. You learn to sing by singing. You don't learn about singing by reading about it. And you learn to love by loving. Feed that part of yourself that is capable of tolerance, of forgiveness, and do not be quick to eat one another's flesh in gossip and criticism. Don't develop a taste for taking a pleasure out of someone else's pain. Schopenhauer may be right. We may be l'animal méchant par excellence, the most perfectly evil animal. But the good news is we don't have to stay that way. We can become the most loving of animals. And I think that's a worthy goal. Amen.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Rev. Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.